So the purpose of the request is the applicant is seeking to rezone the property to R2 residential in order to develop a residential subdivision. The current R1 residential zoning district allows most agricultural uses, as we talked about in the other application, and residential development density of 1 unit per 10 acres, limited to 4 lots every 5 years. The R2 district, which the developer or the applicant is seeking, would allow major subdivisions of 5 or more lots with a minimum lot size of 1.5 acres with an overall 2-acre average and no density limit on the number of lots to be created. Again, we kind of went through this in November, but to reorientate the committee and those in attendance, the subject property is in the town of Star Prairie. You see County Road C to the north of the subject property, which is outlined in red. 100th Street bounds the property on the west side, and then you see the Apple River that meanders along the southeast portion of the property. Going out a little bit further, the red dot signifies the 160-acre parcel. We wanted to add a little bit. I did get a couple calls from residents about whether or not the city of New Richmond would extend in the future out to this area. And so what we did is we put the red dot on the property. The blue line that you see on the perimeter that I'm kind of following here is what we call the urban reserve boundary that the city of New Richmond and the town of Star Prairie agreed to in a cooperative plan that was adopted in 2012. That blue line establishes the extent of what the city of New Richmond will be able to annex in the future. In exchange for that ability to annex, the town, or I should say the city, relinquished some of its extraterritorial zoning and subdivision control powers within the town. Panning out a little bit, we take a look at an aerial photo, the subject property in red. You see County Road C to the north. The area is mixed with some agricultural cropping. We do have the river, obviously you can see, with associated woodlands and wetlands area. And then we do have some major subdivision development to the west and the north of the property. Again, taking a look at the zoning, the highlighted portion in blue is the subject property. The colors in bolder yellow is currently zone R2, and they do represent major subdivisions with residential lot sizes ranging from 1.5 to 6.5 acres. The R1 district, as we mentioned earlier, limits residential development to 1 unit per 10 acres and allows predominantly all agricultural uses. Taking a look at the comprehensive plans for the town of Star Prairie, state statute does require consistency with the local government unit's comprehensive plan. So we did highlight the town of Star Prairie comprehensive plan that's shown in the red box here at the point of the blue arrow. The town plan identifies the subject property as ag forestry, and then you'll see some shaded colors of pink at the very edge of the property, which reflects open space designation. And so just as important as the land use categories in the map, we have to look at what the narrative says from the comprehensive plan. And the ag forestry is shown in green at the bottom right of the map is the entire town of Star Prairie area. And you'll see the areas in green, which is allocated to ag forestry, consist of 3,846 acres in the town. And I'm just going to follow the highlighted text. This area is characterized by large-scale ag operations, hobby-scale farms, and very low-density, small-lot rural residential development that is compatible with ag activity and does not negatively impact prime farmland, environmental areas, drainage ways, or waterways. The town plan narrative goes on to say most of this land should be zoned exclusive ag, which under county zoning would be ag 1 or ag 2, with a limited amount infilled with ag residential, which is R1 or R2. And so from a staff perspective, when we look at town comprehensive plans, they're usually pretty black and white. We can pull policies out of there and pretty much state what they mean. But in this case, we needed the town to interpret what they meant by infill development. And so what we're showing here is the 160 acre subject application represents about 4% of the 3,846 acres highlighted in green, which represents the ag forestry category. And basically what we as staff posed to the town, since we did not want to insert our interpretation in place of theirs, is did they view this as potential development with infill capabilities? And so I think the reason why we had that continuation those first 30 days was to give town time to deliberate this question. We did request an interpretation from the town, and the town board did conclude that the subject rezone property is being suitable for infill development. And so this conclusion led to the town board recommending approval of the rezoning. Likewise, we took a look at the county future land use plan. The county categorized the subject property as agriculture, and similar to what we did with the town, we looked at the exact narrative of the county description, and it basically says the primary intent of the ag areas is to preserve productive ag lands, promote further investments in farming, and maintain eligibility for incentive or tax credits for farmland preservation. The preferred housing unit density is either 1 unit per 20 or 1 unit per 40 acres and corresponds to our ag districts. Lands in this category can also be zoned ag residential, which equates to the R1 or R2 district. Again, we talked a little bit about it during the comprehensive plan update. We defer to the town plans to give us guidance on rezoning decisions. And as we stated earlier, some towns support agriculture by virtue of participating in farmland preservation, Ag 1 and Ag 2 zoning. There are other towns, some of Star Prairie, Richmond, even though you look at their landscape and it's mostly agricultural, their land use policies also support residential. So the county plan tries to capture all these different plans and these different objectives into a quilt work, I guess, of categories that we could describe. And what we've done here, this was done back in 2012, lands in this category can also be zoned ag residential, R1 or R2. Next, taking a look at the environmental corridors. You'll see the Apple River corridor is labeled as an environmental corridor associated with wooded areas and slopes on the southeast part of the property, as we saw in the aerial photo. Next, we take a look at some of the different features on the property that are subject to different ordinances if development should proceed. The parcel does include shoreland areas, which is the green dashed lines. It also includes floodplain areas shown in blue, as well as a closed depression, which is shown in orange. So the shoreland areas shown in the green hatched areas are regulated through our shoreland zoning, which establishes more restrictive setbacks, impervious area limits, land disturbance, and buffer vegetation requirements. The floodplain areas, again, that you see in blue, are regulated through Chapter 18 floodplain zoning of the county code and regulates the use of property within the designated floodplains based on flooding potential and includes elevated structure requirements and limits on how you can grade and fill the property. These resource features would be reviewed in conjunction with any future development applications for the property. And again, this being the rezoning, this is just one step in the development process. The developer would have to proceed to the land division processes, and that's where some of these issues will be looked at in terms of impacts to these areas. This next map shows steep slopes in areas of productive farmland, as well as probable gravel and sand deposits. You'll note the two yellow arrows on the overhead. The narrow bands of steep slopes exist in the northwest and southeast corner of the site. The uplands between the steep slopes are the portions of the property that are farmed and have a peak elevation of about 904 above sea level. That compares to an elevation of about 860 that drops down to the Apple River. So there's about a 45 foot difference in elevation on the property. Chapter 13 and Chapter 15 of our ordinances regulate the alterations of steep slopes to mitigate the impacts of development on water resources and stormwater runoff. You also note that on the plan, we have larger zones of sand and gravel deposits that have been identified on the property through soil survey data, leading to reduced productivity of crops compared to areas with soils better suited for crop cultivation. The property relies on a high-capacity agricultural well to maintain saturation levels. So you'll see on the map there is no productive farmland identified because there aren't the appropriate soils, such as the loamy soils, that would be classified as productive farmland. Next, we take a look at governmental agency review. We talked about the Town of Star Prairie recommendation, recommending approval of the request at their December 5th, 2023 Town Board meeting. Notice was also sent to the St. Croix County Highway Department with respect to the application. They did not have comments on the rezoning so much as they did on future development, and the county would require a traffic impact assessment at the time a land division would be submitted. And that would be reviewed to determine any improvements needed to County Road C. We also submitted the copy of the hearing and the background to the DNR, and you'll see a summary of the DNR comments stating that because the property abuts the Apple River, we need to make sure that there's compliance with our shoreland overlay regulations regarding lot requirements and things of that nature. And again, we'll just state as a note at the bottom, the rezoning does not approve a development plan. The rezoning identifies a zoning district where specific types of development can take place with minimum lot sizes and density requirements. The landowner developer must secure land division approval from both the town and the county before development could proceed. Just briefly touching on some of the comprehensive plan chapter descriptions and goals from the town plan. The town of Star Prairie would encourage a desirable mix of land uses that will maintain the town's rural character and preserve its agricultural heritage while allowing moderate residential, commercial, and industrial development. To manage and control the rate of development to maintain a rural community. Support new developments that are primarily single-family or two-family homes. Allow infill development corresponding with R2 zoning district standards in the ag forest land use category of the comp plan. And that just summarizes what the township concluded with this request. Number 5 and 6 talks about consistency of the application with the water resource management plan. We just kind of walk through those features and compliance with the various chapters of the code that would be used to regulate and review the development. The sanitary, chapter 12, sanitary sewer provisions, chapter 13, land division, chapter 15, zoning, chapter 16, shoreland, and chapter 18, floodplain. And like the last rezoning, we identify the criteria that the committee consider that the proposed use is consistent with the town and county comprehensive plans, consistent with the natural resource management plan, and consistent with the St. Croix County zoning ordinance, that the town does not disapprove the rezoning request, that the rezoning and proposed use is consistent with surrounding zoning districts and does not result in spot zoning, and the rezoning is consistent with surrounding land uses. Again, the options before the committee tonight would be to approve, disapprove, or table the application. And staff recommendation, as we put together for most requests for the committee to consider, staff would recommend approval of the rezoning amendment to the R2 district based on the technical review findings of 1 through 6 above, and that the rezoning is consistent with the town comp plan and the county natural resource plan, that the town of Star Prairie and St. Croix County comprehensive plans, including the future land use map designations and the designation descriptions that describe those categories support the rezoning change to the R2, that the town board recommended approval, and that the proposed use is consistent with and can comply with standards in Chapter 15 zoning. The other thing I would like to add is we did receive 2 correspondences just this afternoon. We did receive a correspondence from the city of New Richmond regarding this application, and we also received a correspondence from Janet D. Ambrosio, and a resident who lives in the area. We made copies of those correspondence for you to consider tonight. That concludes the overview, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions for John before we go to public comment? No, thank you. That was good and thorough. Now we'll turn to you, the public, and ask if anybody would like to make a comment. Please step up to the microphone, identify yourself. I'll take you one at a time if you'd like to identify yourself. Certainly. Tell us who you are, where you live, and say your piece.
Good evening, committee. I'm Ryan Spencer with WSB. I'm an environmental consultant on behalf of the development group for this project. My job and the reason why I got brought into this project is to identify environmental risk. The development team is very proactive on trying to identify environmental risk early on in the process. And one of the risks that we have identified, and I believe it's addressed in the packet from the city of New Richmond, which I was only able to glance through briefly because it came in so late, is the New Richmond closed landfill, which is located about a mile southeast of this parcel, or this property, and the groundwater contamination plume that is working its way northwest to the Apple River, and even documentation that it's across the river to the north. And so the reason why that's important is because the proposed redevelopment and the use of this property is going to have to get water from somewhere. And right now we've identified that as a risk, and we're trying to understand the risk for this property. Right, there has been some testing in the area, but not on this property. We understand the residents immediately to the east has had this VOC impacts in their well, and they've had to drill deeper. And so we are just trying to understand what the feasibility of getting water on the site. So full transparency, we are looking at it. The development team is considering it, and we are on board to help them make some of those decisions.
Thank you for coming. Who else would like to speak? Anybody from the public? Please identify yourself, say where you live, and have your piece.
Hello, my name is Janet D. Ambrosio. I live in Star Prairie Township, just adjacent to the 160 acres. I am west of the 160 acres on 100th Street. First, I want to thank the chairman and the committee members for giving this the time that it has deserved. That is very much appreciated by me. And John, I want to, we're sure where you are there, I just want to thank you again. What you just explained here to me again tonight is probably the best explanation I've had to understand how the committee and the staff come up with their recommendations, looking at both county plan and the township plan. So that explanation does give me pause. Looking at, yes, I guess in fact some interpretations of the plan would allow rezoning to R2. And I didn't see that before, so thank you for that. Mr. Whitstock and your associate, I didn't catch your name. I want to thank you for looking into the risk involved with the water quality, the possible risk involved with the water quality. I sent in a letter very late today because I kept waiting for information from the city of New Richmond or the township of Richmond and Stanton, because I believe that was mentioned in the December meeting. And I never saw any of that information, so I thought I'll wait and see, what comes forth. I don't want to waste people's time, but I didn't see that, so I pulled together a letter today just looking at the testing results. And now I understand, I just want to clarify that this information will now be on the website as well, the county's website, is that correct? So people have access, the New Richmond letter and memorandum?
It will be a public document that you can request, but it won't be on the website.
Okay.
So you can do an open records request for that document.
Okay.
However, it won't be put on the website.
The reason I ask is because when I saw the estimated groundwater plume of contamination from the landfill, I saw that it crossed, as your associate tonight said, crossed into the proposed land, the land proposed for rezoning. We've heard from many people tonight talking about water quality. I think every person that came up in different hearings with public comments talked about water quality. Well, here it is again. It's not going away. And as I stated in my letter, I went through the reports from the consultant company that's doing the testing. They posted their information on the Wisconsin DNR website. And my very, very limited understanding of the information is that, in fact, the well, number 18, which borders the property, has shown very high levels of VOC, volatile organic compounds, and they have been fluctuating, increased a couple years ago, decreased in this last testing in October, luckily, thankfully. So we know that consultant company doing the cleanup is doing a very good job. So that's very encouraging. However, there are still VOCs, as I'm understanding the reports, in some of those wells that are being tested. While the VOC levels don't exceed the Wisconsin standard, they do exceed the preventative action limit that Wisconsin has proposed. And as I understand it, that's a 10% of the standard. And the most recent test of those wells showed some of the wells increase that preventative action limit by maybe 3 to 4 times the amount of VOCs, again, as I'm understanding it. So I would just like the committee to take that into consideration. And I guess I'm of the belief an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Right now, we see that this area is being cleaned up and there's improvement. However, that groundwater plume went farther than they originally thought, and we have no assurances that it's not going to continue to spread. My hope, of course, is that it doesn't, and that those VOCs levels continue to drop even under the preventative action limits. But currently, they don't. So I'm just asking the committee to give this some time, and maybe time will allow us and Mr. Whitstock to develop where there is no contamination involved. That would be my request, as just an ounce of prevention. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for your thoughts. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to address the committee? Is there anyone else here who would like to address the committee?
I did not sign in.
You're welcome to sign in after you speak. I'd allow that.
Let's see. So I'm Al Whitstock, one of the could be developers. I guess since our last meeting, we've, changed a little bit of our direction a little bit, and that is to do some of our own research on the groundwater there. I don't know that it affects the decision to go from R1 to R2, but I do, our point of interest has changed a little bit as we've asked ourselves as developers, would we buy a lot that's potentially has contaminated wells or contaminated water? So our intention is to ask the Wisconsin DNR, maybe, right, with some research from Ryan and WSP, to potentially pay for some wells for some testing on this site before we do anything. So again, I don't know that it has much impact on how, we go, the decision to go from R1 to R2. I just want to let you guys know the level of investigating that we're doing. Does that make sense?
I appreciate you coming, Ms. Westog. All right, one more time. Is there anybody else from the public who'd like to make a comment? That being said, I'll close the public hearing, turn to the committee. And I'd like to say, before I ask for your comments, I'd like to say that, remind you that two things. One, we extended this based on the request that we received from the mayor of New Richmond, so that the mayor of New Richmond and potential other parties could have a little bit more time to do their own due diligence and whatever else they wanted to do. It wasn't for the benefit of the committee or the county. It was based on the request of the municipality, the city of New Richmond. So just so you know that. Also, as we consider this, I'd like to remind you that we are considering this on the basis of our own zoning code. We don't do conditional use. And even though we've heard a great deal of things that may enter into an eventual conditional use situation, that's not our committee's venue. Just want to keep that in mind. Having said that, I would be happy to entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the rezoning request.
Now, do we have any discussion? Mr. Shirley.
I think with all of the packets that we've had, the discussion on the potential contamination of wells, we kind of all understand that. The issue tonight is more on zoning, so we're going to get to, I'm assuming, we're going to get to the well issue and the water issue more with the development plan when that comes before us. So I know that there'll be some more research for that. You know, that with the city of New Richmond, there was some recommendations here nor there. I think some of that will enter in with that development agreement later. It's not necessarily a zoning issue now, so.
Right, all of that would go beyond our committee to other entities, and right, exactly. I wanted to ask, after all of this discussion, has the county any liability at all?
I did review the water service agreement between the town of Star Prairie and City of New Richmond. I reviewed the memo from the City of New Richmond, and based on all the information, I do not believe there is any liability to the county. Our role here tonight as the committee is to address the rezoning, which is what you are doing based on the recommendations from the Community Development Department. And the county can always be sued for anything, but based on my review of all the information, I don't believe the county would be subject to any liability if there were a lawsuit in the future, let's say from a property owner.
That's not an invitation, folks. All right, any other discussion? That scene, let's put her to a vote. That's what I asked.
No, we talked about the notification to other members, potential responsible parties. Notification was done through the city.
I feel we've covered that. All right, let's put her to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? This passes unanimously. I want to thank everybody for waiting this out, and let's move on. No, let's take a break. Anybody want a break? I think we should. Let's take about a 6-minute break. Hi, folks. Why don't we do business item number 7, resolution supporting submission of a targeted resource management grant for the Connect River watershed. Jason.
Okay, so this agenda item is simply authorizing resolution to authorize myself and Tim Stieber, our Land and Water Conservation Administrator, to apply for a grant. The maximum grant amount is $600,000 for the Targeted Runoff Management Grant, TRM. And the purpose of these grants is to reduce our total maximum daily load on Lake St. Croix. So, we're going on 3 years ago, we applied for the Willow River Trim Grant, and we've been working on projects in the Willow River watershed, which drains to Lake St. Croix. The Kinney does as well. So this would be for implementing watershed work in that, waterways, cover crops, nutrient management, that kind of stuff. We don't believe that we can hit the $600,000 allotment with staff time and the practices that are out there. So we're seeking a $525,000 grant. And of that grant, it's basically a 70-30 cost share. And so a landowner that is going to do a project with us, let's say it's $1,000, it would be $700 that we would be reimbursing them for their work. We would then get that money and that from the state, and then our 30% match, and that can be in kind. So we're looking at staff time, our office space, our mileage. So generally, if we are awarded this $525,000 grant, $375,000 would go into conservation practices, $150,000 would support staff over the next 3 years. And we are not going to add any staff because this project falls in line if we're awarded the grant dollars, because we just found out this last week that our Willow River grant is extended through the end of the year. So that work will keep us busy. There's a lot of projects going because we've had such a nice mild winter here. And then this grant, if we're awarded, would be projects for 25, 26, and 27.
Do we have any questions? Again, celebrating clean water and our commitment to it. Do we have a motion?
Make a motion that we agree to, or that we bring forward a resolution supporting the Targeted Resource Management Grant. As much as you can get.
We have a second from Sean Anderson. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. None opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Moving on to business item number 8, resolution supporting 2024 Wisconsin DNR Stewardship Grant application for Glen Hills County Park Shower Restroom Building. Take it away.
So as part of the county board's adopted budget and KIP project budget for 2024 was our Glen Hills shower bathroom facility entrance station project. So the entrance station is kind of separate for this grant because we believe the bathroom building and that is what would apply or what could be used for the grant dollars. If we keep the grant amount under $250,000, it doesn't have to go before the financial board at the state for a review. It is a 50-50 cost share, so we're looking for $249,500 for that all-season bathroom building to offset some of the capital improvement dollars that the county could possibly occur. So this here would just allow us to apply for the grant and handle any grant documents if we're awarded the grant. The deadline for the grant is May 1st.
Do we have any questions for Jason? Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Do we have a second? Lots of seconds. Second, third, fourth. Okay, seconded by Jerry Van Summeren. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Another unanimous vote. Thank you very much. Moving on. This one's a discussion on zoning district change public notice policy. Jason.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chair. This was originally brought up by Supervisor Counter a couple months ago, And the main point of this notice policy, why it's under consideration tonight, is for county and town initiated rezoning request. This would not be for somebody like we've just had tonight that wants to zone their own property. Obviously, they're aware of the implications that they're wanting to do to their property when they're applying for it themselves. So this here would be like if the county did a comprehensive rewrite and had to assign all new zoning districts or at least some zoning districts to parcels, or if the town updated their comprehensive plan and had significant enough changes that they wanted to change the zoning of several parcels within their town. As the policy is drafted here, it would be a postcard going out. The direct cost per postcard using our septic maintenance mailers is $1.14 per card. That is the cost of publishing and mailing of it. If we were to go through a comprehensive rewrite like we did as a county in 2019, and there would be a total of 12,688 different property owners in the 17 of our 21 towns under county zoning. So that cost, the direct cost would be $14,464. The post, yeah, excuse me. Yeah.
So you're saying that all 12,688 parcels are going to you're going to change every single one of them at one time? That just would not happen to the best in the past. Has there been a historical time that we've changed every single parcel at one time in St. Croix County?
I believe 2019, because
Every
all the
zoning
one
was
districts
redone.
changed.
Okay.
Yep.
I don't recall that because I think I was under our, different people unless, that just doesn't make sense to me, but go ahead.
I think the other way to look at it is that's a worst case scenario too. So we're giving you the upper range. So it wouldn't be any more than that ever. Because that would be rezoning every parcel then.
Correct. But if there was 10 properties that were being changed, and that, then we'd only send postcards to 10 properties. We wouldn't send it to every property owner within the county. And that 12,000 number, that is after you take out people that own multiple properties. So so we took out all the duplication out of that 12,000 number. Now there will be some indirect cost, of course, with this policy, staff time, and that would be something. And that's not only on just doing the postcard, but how much in depth we get with the mailing. Because if we just say that, hey, your property is changing from commercial C1 to commercial C3, a lot of people are going to be like, what does that mean? So they're going to be calling our office wondering, and we're going to have to explain it. The other way, if we took and tried to explain it on each card, it would be a bigger mailing, and it could still generate a lot of questions. So that kind of workflow or extra cost would also be associated besides the printing and publication and postage. So, yeah.
Can we just use the postcard? And I know that not everyone will do this, but to direct them, like for further explanation on what this means for your property, here's this link to explain the difference between C1 and C3. Because I know not every, I know people will still call, but that might take out more than 50% of the people who would call.
Yep.
I just want to give a little bit of background behind why they had a concern over this. And recently, not that recently, but we did have a major comprehensive change in the town of Star Prairie. And during the process of doing the change, many properties that have historically always been what we would consider today an R2, all of a sudden all became R1. And that made a very large impact on all of these property owners that had these properties that all of a sudden had a density change from 2 acre to 10 acre property size. And again, historically, the town always was in the R2 type, where it was always a 2-acre density. With the changes that they had made, it impacted many of the landowners, and it gave cause for concern because a lot of these landowners looked and said, well, all of a sudden now their property value is diminished dramatically because their intent was for holding the property was for future land development in that township, because that's always been the policy of that town. Now with the changes, all of a sudden they're forced into either doing a comprehensive revision on their own properties and spending the multiple thousands of dollars to go through the surveying and the processes and hiring everybody to make it happen, and then paying for the fees and costs to the town and to the county to rezone it back to the way it originally was. So the intent with this is why I'm thinking of this was, in the process of doing it, basically the township has an obligation to do their postings. Their postings amount to a couple of bars in the town hall. They do not, with theirs, they did, I believe they did do the legal posting for the paper. Most people today, though, do not look at a paper. We don't even have a local paper in New Richmond anymore. The paper's part, the Hudson paper kind of covers it, I guess. But with everything in mind, it's not a viable means to how everybody communicates anymore. So when we're having these large comprehensive revisions that aren't being done by the owners of the property itself, they're being done by the municipality. What I'm basically getting at with this this revision or this change to do postcards is to notify, so that these people realize that something is coming up. There is a public hearing coming up in the future regarding this, and be aware. And a lot of people, even with postcards, they may be ignored, but the attempt was made in a physical mailing. Until we get to the point where everybody in the county has registered their emails, it's difficult to do it any other way right now. So that's the gist of it. So I'm trying to look for a way that we protect people so that they don't have to go through all of the expense to redo their property back after a revision's been adopted by the municipality.
Okay, so this is a discussion, and if we're going to make a policy change, we'll have to have it on an agenda again. This is a long night. How do you fellas think about setting this aside, bringing it up again, or just give me a thumbs up, we want to bring it up again, or do you want to have a discussion about it again? Or do you want to run it through the machine right now?
Just have one comment. Is there a better way of doing it than the postcard? Postcard, they probably did that 70 years ago. They sent a postcard and just as many people ignored it back then. Is there a better way, now that we've moved on in life and with a lot of technological changes, than a postcard?
Yeah, online. We're working on doing some email list right now with Adam on different topics within community development. I believe the committee a couple months ago brought up about putting it out with the tax bills. However, our tax bills are almost like a W-2 where you tear off the ends, so it's very hard to include anything with that. The statute, it requires that 2 weeks notice in the newspaper, and then our ordinance also requires us to notify all the property owners within 300 feet. So that's what the process is on a normal rezone. However, on a bigger rezone like this, you're probably going to have more open houses, public hearings, a longer process, and multiple agenda items in that through many meetings, so.
Just real quick, on your number 3, the standard operating procedures, I do like if the town initiates the rezoning, then they're paying for the postage. I appreciate you adding that in there. I like that. But yeah, I think we should add this to a future agenda to pass this through.
Yeah, I think rather than giving a thumbs up or thumbs down tonight, we should have it as another agenda item and actually discuss it as policy. 'Cause I think we need to save a little energy to do due diligence on the park. And I don't mean any disrespect to this idea, but I'd like to give it a fair shake later at another meeting. Is that fair? Okay, let's set it aside.
Okay.
Pick it up on another agenda. Moving on. The Eckerd Blufflands Park Entrance Trail and Cost Estimate. Number 10.
Yeah, so Supervisor Anderson had brought up a couple months ago about seeing what some estimates would be for trail development within Eckerd Blufflands. And as staff was reviewing this, one of the things in that came up, and it was clear in the master plan too, is that the old Highway 35 road there, which is actually part town of Hudson and part town of St. Joe, each one of them maintains about half of the road. Has had many accidents where the entrances are on Highway 35. So we included as staff the entrance in here because it was determined back as part of the master planning process that we needed to have some turn lanes out on 35, that the access should be coming straight out to 35 for better line of sight going north and south. And so currently, right now, there's a significant drop there. I'm going to scroll down. The old Highway 35 here coming through has roughly about a 15 to 20 foot elevation increase up to the Highway 35 elevation. And the preliminary concept that was drafted as part of the master planning process here raises that road up, and that so that the access is coming more level and squares it up too, instead of going at what you would call probably a 45-degree angle like it does right here. So there was some preliminary design work. The design work is not fully completed though for this access point. We had a hard time forecasting what the estimate might be. So for the trail part of it, we kind of know what the prices were back in 2021 for the Highway 35 bike and pedestrian trail. And we know what the bids just came in at last November for construction, which was about an 80% increase. So we took the preliminary estimates back when the master plan was created and increased it by an inflation factor of 80% for the cost down below. However, the costs that are shown do not include the engineering work that needs to be completed for any of the work.
And the one thing to remember too on the estimated cost on this is, we need DOT approval, we need to work with the town partners. So this is one idea that we have that we're kind of giving you an estimate on, but it may not be what the final design looks like.
Correct.
Yeah, because the towns would have to approve cutting off, they're changing their road, right?
Correct.
So that would be a more in-depth discussion with the town boards probably, yeah.
Yep. I received a call from Teresa on that, the chair with the town of St. Joe. I was under some impressions but they would like to be involved in this access. They may have ideas in that would change or vary it slightly from the master plan that was adopted. While we're talking and that, it probably makes sense not to talk to the town of Hudson at the same time, since the south half of the road is town of Hudson. So I did receive that confirmation, but it's not a lot of road in that, but there is a lot of fill, and we did reach out. So not knowing where the committee wanted to go or what the thoughts were, we did reach out to SEH to get an estimate on what it would take to take this preliminary concept design, to get it to construction documents, to be able to go out to bid with it. And SEH came back and they actually did some work for kind of putting together an estimate on the cubic yardage and what materials would be needed, and then also the estimate for the design. And so they're estimating the project construction cost at $830,175, and the design allowance would be about $83,018. Whereas before, the bid was $664,140, or that was the estimate, not the bid. So they're building in some increase there, and they're saying that there's about 25% increase. So that number, of course, is much different than our estimates, but we were just guessing completely. So that's for the entrance.
Where do you see this falling into our long-term plans?
Yeah, so I think what Supervisor Anderson was trying to do was to see if we could take a smaller chunk of this Eckerd Park project. So timing-wise, May is when the departments have to turn in their KIP requests. So that's why we're vetting it through the committee now to see if Jason then will submit a KIP request for a piece of this property rather than the bigger project, which got pushed out a number of years.
Yeah, because the bigger project is at the end of the schedule, and it's one big, like, I think it was $12 or $14 million thing. If we're able to do something with it now so that people can take advantage of the gorgeous property that it is, without, I guess, wasting money to do work we're going to have to undo later, then it is worth at least considering, in my opinion.
So you're thinking something that's going to be done anyway within the master plan? So we're just really starting the process? Jerry?
This is not a bid, this is just a rough estimate of what it's going to cost, right?
Rough estimate.
Yeah, and when is this scheduled, is this on the schedule, Ken, for any special time in the future, or is it just?
So right now, our KIP plan calls for developing the full Eckerd Bluffland, which I think was closer to 15 million in 2028.
Okay.
And so, in May though, when the department heads submit their KIP request, Jason has the opportunity to say, well, I'd like to take a piece of it and see if we can do it in one of the years before then.
I think Sean has a good idea. As we see over the years, things accelerate as far as the cost, the price, so if we can get some of this done cheaper. But I would certainly suggest before we do that, that we get some other bids, not just take the SEH people. I'm sure there are others who would love to bid on that. Maybe even our own county highway department may want to. So.
Of course, we could put something together for the KIP while we're doing bids, right? Maybe?
Yeah, so we wouldn't actually do a bid until after you guys approve money in the KIP. So right now, it's really concept. So we want to know whether you approve of breaking the project into pieces as the concept, And is this amount of the project that Jason will go through, is that what you want as a early phase, a phase one, I guess?
There's one issue with this property that is still kind of baffling me. If you could go to page 405. So by creating a new entrance off of 35, what we are doing is also creating a new entrance to, if you go down, those property owners on the left would also share that new entrance, correct?
To be determined, I would say. So there's a lot of conversations that I think need to happen yet. Again, with the towns, really figuring out, and that if that access is going to change or if we're going to leave River Heights Trail as it is. The property owners back there was some opposition as part of the master planning process. It was a 33-foot easement going back in there. Now it is a 66-foot easement because the town of Hudson required it when the Zappo lot was created to be 66 feet wide. Back in the 1970s, that whole access was surveyed and the center line was surveyed. So then there was a total of 33 feet, so 16 and a half feet on each side of that center line. And now I believe that there would be 33 foot right away on each side. So there's also agreements in regards to that road that any improvements or maintenance over $50 is to be approved by all the property owners along it. So the whole River Heights Trail issue there is something that we could probably revisit.
I think that's a big issue to figure out before we go down the whole idea of trying to bite off part of this is that access point. Because I don't know, I mean, Jason, how do you feel about private property owners using your entrance and past your entry station to go through our park to get to their property? You can't essentially close that off ever.
Right, it's complicated, I mean, the
Right.
UPS trucks and everything are going in and out. So, friends, need to get in and out, through the park, and they might not want to buy a park pass because they maybe don't go to any St. Croix County parks besides when they come to here to see their friends.
I would reverse the question too. I've talked to a lot of these property owners. How would you feel about them building a park around your property? So we have to have a really good, congenial, neighborly relationship with every single one of these people and listen carefully to what they want and have to say, and then develop our policy in relationship with everything that they're concerned about, because that's going to build a long-term relationship with our neighbors in this property. And so far, I think we've done a pretty good job listening, and so have they. So our policy of not being heavy-handed is paying off, and we'll continue that. And in saying that, I'm not suggesting that anybody has said anything heavy-handed here. I'm really complimenting the staff and how they've handled and how we've handled every one of these relationships with the neighbors. And we do need to have revisit the relationship of how we're going to handle River Heights Trail, because once we start this, we will be cementing in that policy. So I think that might be one of the first things that we do, along with talking to St. Joseph and Hudson in terms of how the entrance comes in and how the neighbors along Old Highway 35 will have access. All of those things need to be addressed. But the number one thing is, do we want to give a thumbs up to a KIP entrance, and to what quantity, to what value do we want to put to that? so that we can get this going before 5, 6 years from now. Because giving access to the public to this piece of property, I agree with Supervisor Anderson, should be becoming a higher priority. So what value do we put on that as a KIP entrance, line item, excuse me. My tongue is getting tired.
Mr. Chair, if I may just add one comment. One of the issues with the entrance is I'm unaware of any grants that are available for that project, you know, and so if we don't have good access to the property, it's hard to apply for other grants like the recreational trail program and the Knowles Nelson grant that you guys just approved us to apply for with that. So I'm not saying that the county needs to do this now and that, but those entrance costs, I don't see any grant opportunities for available.
So Jason, talk about the first couple of stages of the development. So we talked about the entrance so far, but what would be the next pieces? And I guess where can we draw the line as far as creating a phase one?
We're really splitting the park into, I'll call it 3 geographical areas. The first part is the very northern portion of the property, and this was originally designated as walk-in campsites. J.R. Ballard, our parks administrator, and myself were actually out here and walked the property in that about a month ago, so just so that we could put eyes on the ground without the leaf cover and without snow. This path going down to the water here looks like it would be fairly easy to navigate, but this is very, very steep terrain on both sides. And underneath our zoning ordinance, this area would be considered the slope preservation zone, which then we're not allowed to fill and grade to create a trail going down here without some kind of a variance. But we could do boardwalk, but of course boardwalk is going to increase cost. The top portion here where the campsites are, that's relatively flat or rolling. That is buildable for campsites. The biggest thing that we run into there is for our staff to be able to get back in there for garbage collection, or if there was any emergency services needed back in there, how do we get them back there? So this swing bridge here would be critical in order to get some kind of a trail going back to that north side. So that's why the cost is kind of high on this project. Now, these estimates were based on the lineal foot of the trail, and part of the master plan, they broke it into trails in flat areas and trails in ravines. So these do have the 80% inflation factor included into it though. So if we're high on the entrance, we're probably high on some of these numbers as well. JR and I both probably believe that this area on the north side, because of the challenges that the terrain have, that probably wouldn't be one of the first things to develop out here. The other option is this Oak Savannah Loop Trail, and I'm going to scroll down. Basically, this is that white-lined trail that is going through the prairie. So there was a prairie contract with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to plant prairies out there, and we do have their permission to install a trail. Originally, this trail was designed to be paved, but of course, we wouldn't have to take and start out with pavement. We could take and start out with a normal gravel surface. The overlook here, that is a pretty good view from that area. It's probably one of the prettier and easier places to access on the property. This is all relatively flat right here until you get back to about the corner of the cornfield or the hayfield. Right here, there's quite a bit of terrain going uphill. And then once you get up by this opening here, that's another nice flat open area. So this trail could be feasible to develop fairly easily.
What's the cost estimate that you had on that one?
And that $202,000, and that's got the 80% inflation factor And roughly the trail would be 2,800 lineal feet, or right at about a half a mile loop.
And that's including like going to the overlook and everything?
I believe so, yep.
Okay.
What dollar figure would you recommend we think about for the KIP for this spring?
Well, so it starts with the road entrance, which is 1 to 2 million. I mean, that's where you start. And then what you need to do is pick, all right, so instead of just building a driveway into it, what else do you want to add? I mean, we should have something in there if we're going to spend that much to get you in there. What else do you want to have in there then?
Just trying to scroll down. So
Sean, it's
kinda-
your neighborhood. What are you thinking?
I'm literally just thinking trails. So like driveway area for people to put a car, trails.
So Oaks Savannah Trail and maybe out to the overlook, just a loop, simple loop?
Yeah, and then I guess we could consider the one on the southern side, but I'm fine with holding off on the north side. That makes total sense to me.
So if you're gonna do the entrance, you know, wherever that came in, there wouldn't be any buildings or anything at the entrance, but that could be almost like our parking area. This area right here, it's got the natural surface hiking trails. That's a pretty nice pine plantation, kind of shaded, you know, in the summer and that, there could be some nice walking trails in there, without being in the hot sun. Those are not in our estimates, but it is a kind of a nice area. But those trails could easily lead over to this prairie trail.
I think just parking by where the entry station is maybe planned or where it's even put right now makes sense. And then enough trail to get you to the main loop with the overlook.
Right. So, so this is what I would kind of call the central portion of the parcel or the middle portion. And then the last option, which the access kind of comes into question with the River Heights Trail, is the southern loop, which has more swing bridges and stuff involved. But and of course, this is where all the camper cabins are proposed. But this area is much more conducive to development than that northern part even. So there's much more flat ground, not quite as much terrain.
Just a question on the entry. We had that colored map on 400. That just covers our actual entry point from 35 in. We would still have to, if we were doing a modified version, we would still have to tie into what is labeled there as old 35 to get access for those residents at that point, correct?
That's one of the things that the town of St. Joe wants to talk about. So on the master plan, it's actually still keeping the south access of Old Highway 35 coming up to a cul-de-sac. Well, there you're able to see it on page 400, the bulb of the cul-de-sac there. That would be where the road would end. And then all of this would be vacated because there would be some stormwater management that needs to be done as part of the project.
I'm just trying to come up in my head what, you know, if we're $1 million to $2 million for the entrance, but we're gonna have to do a little more than that right in that area. You know, where do we draw that line? Where's that dollar amount is what I'm trying to figure out, so.
Yep. As Jerry mentioned, and since this is not any kind of TAP grant like we've talked about in the past, if our highway department has the capacity to do the design work and do the construction work, that is an option for us because we're not going to be tied to those grant restrictions.
And you said the southern option
It's got a lot
requires the construction of these swing bridges in order to get in there?
Well, not necessarily. So if you look at the main road area where that's coming in here, this is all pretty nice land. There's not a lot of steep ravines. Only south of that existing field area do you get into some significant ravines, and that's where the swing bridges would need to be if you want to really cross them. But if you don't want to cross them, there is quite a bit of land on the edge of the field up here where these X's are. This is all flat ground here as well, kind of around that white trail.
I don't know. I like swing bridges. They're fun. My opinion, but
Another
One of
question
the-
for you.
Yeah,
If we're looking at the south side, on the River Heights Trail, is where it is in that, coming across the north of that south plan there?
Yep.
Is that basically where the existing road is? Or
Yes.
is it, okay,
it is. Yep,
Right.
and it's paved right now, but it is not wide enough for two vehicles to meet and still be on the pavement, so there could need to be some widening. I believe it's about 16 feet wide right now.
so in order to do the south, we probably have to widen the road first.
Probably widen the road, yep. So the cabin that's existing on the property is right here, and by far that is a very beautiful spot. It's got a great overview of the water, and then there's two bluffs that kind of drop off to the north here and off to the south, and those are actually pretty decent accesses to get down there. The plan made it look like that north side, you know, with just a trail walking down would be the best approach. Both of these would probably require stairs, but they're much more easily manageable because those two fingers go out at a fairly slow downgrade, so it wouldn't be like it's 100 feet of steps, you know, vertically.
I would
Try to build
suggest
something.
maybe asking you to put together two options, bring them to us in the next meeting. We still have time then to put something together for the KIP. Jerry?
I have a question. So, it looks like you're planning on starting on the north section first, even though that's the most difficult. Why don't we start on a different section where we can make more progress?
I think he's just going north to south just because it's the way it's been presented in the past. I think the recommendation was to not do the north right away.
Oh, okay, I
Yeah.
thought from what I heard from Jason, we were gonna start with the north. Okay,
no.
okay,
Sorry.
then I stand corrected.
So,
Yeah.
really,
No, low-hanging fruit is a good idea.
yeah, if you took this line here and if you extended this along right here, everything north of there has a lot of development challenges with the lower St. Croix riverway ordinance provisions because almost all of it is slope preservation zone. So it means a lot of boardwalk accesses. We have difficulty getting in here for garbage pickup. So those really doesn't make a lot of sense right now. That is mainly hardwoods up in this area, fairly mature. But basically this white trail here is going along an existing trail kind of between the hardwoods and some of the pine plantations. So this white trail would come around. Now, this entrance building, depending on the grade and how everything shapes up out there, it might make sense to hold that farther north because then our trail cutting off on the north side wouldn't go through as much of those pines there. We'd be able to save or preserve some of the land. And then we could have to figure out what this south route is going to look like. So I guess what we're originally proposing, and that if you're going to do a phase one, would be the entrance, call that 1.8, and probably this trail here for the 200,000 plus design, and maybe a little bit more for some trails to get from the future entrance building parking area into this main prairie loop area.
2.5 about, basically. 2.5 million to be safe. Safer side.
So I'm reading you guys and I'm seeing that you guys are interested in the project and break it into pieces. What if we took that $15 million plan and broke it into a 10-year implementation at $1.5 million a year, and we just put a steady line right across the KIP, but it's a more manageable piece then. And then we have a phasing of implementation. We build the entrance, we build a trail, we build the maintenance shed, we build another trail. We start doing pieces of it, and then, 10 years from now, you will have the entire park.
That makes a great deal of sense, except when you get out there with their green and red panels and somebody gets a notion to turn down everything that has a soft side to it, like a park, then we're going to get delayed and suddenly the costs go up. My concern is that if we don't do something concrete and give the public access, that we may get delayed. That's just my concern, that we may get delayed to the point where the public doesn't have something meaty to enjoy.
I like that idea for after this first step. I think just the fact that I think the fact that just the road is going to could cost more than that. Let's start with getting a trail or two in there, and then maybe phase in. Because if $3 million of that $15 million budget is for what we'd want to do sooner, then you're obviously taking $1.5 million and spreading it over of savings and spreading that over 9 years too.
I agree. I like the idea. I think, but getting that River Heights Trail is the key to the whole thing. I think realistically, by the time all of that's figured out, I don't see it happening in the KIP until 26, 27, until probably we're at a point where we could actually implement a phase 1.
All right, so what do you think about the idea of asking for 2 different ideas and coming back to next month and giving a thumbs up on that?
I think we pretty well have a consensus to avoid the north side though, correct? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I was gonna go to the Town of St. Joe's meeting, and that at March, I think it's March 13th or 14th. So I'll get their feedback too, and I can kind of bring that back, because that whole entrance, if the town doesn't want to vacate that portion of the road, it could be a big issue.
I think the things that I'm thinking about that have concerns on, one is working with the township, like what you're saying, for the entrance, and ensuring that everybody's on board with that. The other thing is just ensuring for the future, if that for sure is where the entrance is going to be, and that's our main road coming in, working with those other property owners just to ensure that we won't have any issues for the future, because I'd hate to start investing a bunch of money and then have a bunch of legal tie-ups and things because of, we didn't get a contract with them or whatever we're going to need to do to make sure that everybody's on board for this project. So with that in mind, it might not be able to happen right away, but I do agree. I'd like to see it happen really soon and get the project underway, but I just want to make sure the background is there first and we have that part, and that would be something I guess I would really want to see be able to have the staff work on that part of it to make sure that the project is viable and that we aren't going to have any issues.
Also, is the highway department weighed in on this entrance with regard to closing? What's best for closing or not closing the current entrances?
And that, yes, and that they are pretty confident from talking with Robbie that the access out on Highway 35 is very unsafe right now, and doing something like the proposed concept, not saying that's exactly it, but would be a good fix.
And are we going to check with state DOT and get their opinion?
And that, yeah, so Robbie said in that this one wouldn't actually require state approval, and that we just have to run it past, so they know what's going on, but it's not like it's state plan approval, so. Yeah.
Go ahead.
The other thing, just to bring up again, that I've talked a little bit about in the past, but if we have the time and we can do it, it would maybe be a good idea to explore also the use of some of our military units. We have a bridge building unit right in Hammond. and they do rope bridges. I mean, so there's a lot of these things that if we can team up to work efforts, you know, myself and I know of other people in the county that have experience putting military civilian projects together, which such as like Freedom Park that went up this last summer. So it may be a cost savings for the county, but it also becomes a great training initiative for these guys where they have an end project that they participate in that's a lot better than going down and building something at Fort McCoy they got to tear apart again.
Something to think about.
Right. So currently, and I should have said this at the beginning, up here along Old Highway 35, this is like a 6-foot bank. So the road's kind of down in the hollow. There's about a 6-foot bank in order to get up onto the county property. And then the reason why the access is proposed on the north here is because you got all the private land ownership here to the south between Old Highway 35 and New Highway 35. And from Old Highway 35, then it's almost just like a cliff going back up to New Highway 35. Right now, if somebody was going to drive or have access, they do come in on this red X'd out road, and they're coming through here. There's like a little pull off someplace right in here, and then they continue down, and there is just a grass, dirt parking area right here. That's where a lot of the hunters that hunt the park in that park currently. But otherwise, this is really our main access as far as any traffic or vehicles right now.
I just thought, timing-wise also, there's 2 projects currently on the KIP that are going to require a bond issue, and that is the Highway Hudson Shop, which we'd estimated at like 7 million or 10 million, I forget how big Robbie got it to be. So that's like in 2 years though, and then there's the jail expansion project, which is like $45 million, and that's 4 or 5 years out. So those are staggered out there, but if we're looking at like a $3 million initial phase, it would probably be best to time it with the highway shop project to do 1 bond issue for those 2 combined, and that's only, I think, 2 years out. I had to double check, but that might work out good with your timing. Okay.
Well, if we're going to do 3, we might as well do 7. All right. Bring us a couple ideas for those trails, if you can, for next month, then we can.
Okay, so you'd like a couple ideas, and do you want us to start on some of these collaboration, communication with property owners, and of course, Town of St. Joe, but Town of Hudson too, I would assume?
I think with regard to the property owners, maybe we should wait until we have a couple ideas. We don't want to get anybody up in arms, and then we'll have an open house. Just a suggestion.
You know, really, we'll have a KIP plan by July, as I think when the KIP plan gets presented to the county over July, August. So if the county board approves it in 2 years, then we start talking to the neighbors.
Right.
Talking to the neighbors right now is going to be a little premature if the county board shoots the whole thing down.
Right, and then we don't want to have told them a plan and then change the plan, because that will may cause bad feelings. We don't want to do that.
I would still definitely work with the towns at this point, though. Yeah.
Right. So that's where we are now. I think we should move on to the next business item. Anything else before we move?
Does the township regulate the River Trail Height, the River Heights Trail, or is it the private property owners on the west side?
They don't currently, but that was one of the comments that the Town of Hudson had, so.
Okay.
Yep.
I mean, that would be the only reason to engage them at this point.
It's a private driveway, basically, is what it is, to those 4 houses.
So, to me, I would talk to the township like you're planning, and then if you get that kind of an input, then you might have to. Because that's the key, I think, to this whole project.
Okay. Any other thoughts? All right, now the reason I got out of bed this morning was to hear the financial report. let's have it.
All right, so the financial report in your packet, it's really for January, but I'm not going to talk about January 2024. What I'm going to look at is the second column in, and I'm only going to look at the bottom number. So the Register of Deeds, the second fiscal column in is fiscal year 2023. What I want to do is just quickly look at the bottom numbers. So we see a $77,000 loss. It's in brackets. That means it's a loss for the 2023. But really it was the fees. So the fees were about $140,000 under what we had estimated them to be, economic slowdown with housing. So we saw that, and that's where that $77,000 comes in. So we missed the mark on that department. Recycling, so we look at that. They're $13.96 in the black for last year, so they were perfect. Hazardous waste was $11.94 in the black, so that's perfect. The Parks Department, we get down the bottom, they finished $13,000 in the black, so that's great. Everything's working good there. Fairgrounds is 0. UW Extension, we get to the bottom of that, they're $28,000, so we're good there. I think they had some vacancies in one of their educators, that's where that comes from. Resource, Land and Water, there's 6. Yep, that's the county's money. The UW Extension doesn't keep that money. The county keeps that money. It all falls to the bottom line of the general fund. Resource, Land and Water. So you see a negative $69,000. So what I'm going to point out, though, is the last revenue line item, which is fund balance applied. So this one and the next fund, we typically know we're going to be using some cash reserves. So what we did was we used $69,000 of cash reserves, which is right on target. Next year we have $67,000 budgeted. So we're actually right where we thought we should be for that. The planning, the land records department. So they're negative $65,000. And again, we look at fund balance applied. We knew their retained records were going to be down. We knew we'd be using some fund balance just like we're planning to next year. So again, it's right on target for where we would expect them to be. Zoning department in the black by $17,000. And that was it. Economic development is $665,000. So that's all the departments that have jurisdiction here. And other than Register of Deeds, where we were off because of the economic slowdown there, I think they did really well. So. Yep.
Thank you very much. All right, now we get the Community Development Department update. Jason, you're up.
Okay, so don't have a lot, but I wanted to include the 5-year citizen groundwater monitoring report that Adam Mead completed. He did a really good job analyzing the data over the last 5 years. They are extending that program for at least another 2 more years to get more data. Unfortunately, the results are there is a statistically positive trend that we are seeing more nitrates and more contaminants in our groundwater. So long story short, that's what the report says. So they are implementing a new type of water study this year to look at like caffeine and personal hygiene products and that in wastewater and the impacts of housing developments and what that'll be. So it'll be interesting to compare that with the normal 180 wells that we've been testing over the last 5 years.
So how much caffeine do they feed cows?
I don't know.
None. Any questions? Any questions?
With the nitrates, was there any correlation? Did you look at land use of the areas where the nitrates were at a higher level? Is there any type of particular crops or something that are being used that tend to increase nitrates at a higher rate than other?
Yeah, in general, and that the higher nitrates are found in the heavy agricultural areas of the county, and more significantly where it's corn on corn type of cropping rotation versus corn, hay, beans, or corn, soybeans so far.
And when they continue the program, do you know for how much longer they'll continue it? Is it extending for another 5 or just year to year?
It's just planned for another 2 years right now, because we don't know what this new water initiative is gonna take, so we might wanna grow that too, so. And that one will also include PFAS, so it's the first time that the county will be testing for any PFAS. So really, the new test will look at public sewer, private wells. It will look at housing development, private septic, private wells from like 40, 50 years ago, early 80s when we had a development go through. Then I'll look at about 20-year-old development, early 2000s, the 03, 04, and then also compare that to the rural areas. And we're going to be doing PFAS samples in all those 4 categories, but they're $500 a pop. And so our sample size is going to have to be relatively small in each one. So we're thinking like 3 samples in each one. The other tests for the hygiene and personnel products in that are much more reasonable.
My thought would be later, we should have a committee meeting that kind of focuses around land and water, and we can get reports on various things, including this, and we've talked, I don't know how many of these agenda items walk right up to and then into water quality. Everything that we do tends to involve water quality, either obliquely or straight on, and it might be interesting to have something like that. I guess I'm talking about agenda items, but to actually address it as land and water, because we are the land and water committee. So I appreciate this, and that's my comment. So, but not next month. We've got a lot going on. So, okay, are you finished?
Yeah, that's all I got.
Thank you. This is very good. Request for future agenda items. Mr. Shirley.
I would like a discussion on what our options are and what we're allowed to do or not allowed to do as far as gathering email addresses with property tax owners. And, maybe go outside the box a little bit and say, do we need a certain software or something that we don't have now that would allow us to do this? Like, give me some options of what we have out there and maybe what some of our larger counties around the area are doing.
Any other agenda items? You're welcome to email them, call, whatever, and always keep them coming. All right, the date of the next meeting is Thursday, March 15, 2024. Look forward to seeing everybody there. With that, we adjourn.